Story 1, The Lights on Kettle Ridge. My name is Daniel Moss, and I've been a power lineman for Appalachian Electric for 23 years. I've worked Christmas Eve more times than I can count. It's always the same: trees fall on lines, transformers blow, somebody's heat goes out. You drive up into the hollers, fix what's broken, and drive back down. Simple work. Honest work. What happened on Kettle Ridge in December of 2019 wasn't simple. I got the call around 4 in the afternoon on Christmas Eve. Dispatcher said a whole section up on Kettle Ridge had lost power, about 8 houses scattered along a logging road that hadn't been maintained in years. The road was barely passable in summer. In winter, it was a gamble. But the people up there were old families. They'd been on that ridge since before the state had paved roads. They didn't ask for much, and when they called, you went. I took the service truck and started the climb just after 5. The sun was already sinking behind the ridgeline, turning the sky a deep bruised purple. Snow had fallen 2 days before, and it clung to the pines in thick, uneven layers. The road twisted and narrowed as I climbed, the ruts frozen solid beneath my tires. I'd been up Kettle Ridge a handful of times over the years. It was quiet country. The kind of place where you'd see a porch light burning and know someone was home, but you'd never see them outside. People up there kept to themselves. They waved if you passed them, but they didn't stop to talk. About halfway up, I passed the Caudle place. It was a small clapboard house with a rusted tin roof and a satellite dish bolted to the side. The porch light was off. So were the windows. That made sense, they were part of the outage. But as I rolled past, I saw something that didn't. Their Christmas tree was lit. It stood in the front window, clear as day. White lights, the old incandescent kind, strung in uneven loops. They glowed soft and steady against the darkness inside the house. I slowed down, leaning toward the passenger window to get a better look. The tree was the only thing on. No other lights. No TV flicker. No glow from a lamp or a hallway. Just the tree, standing there in the window like someone had plugged it in and walked away. I didn't stop. It wasn't my business. Maybe they had a generator running just for that. Maybe it was battery-powered. I'd seen stranger things. I kept driving. The next house I passed was the Hensley place, set back about 50 yards from the road. Same situation. No power. Dark windows. But there, in the front room, another Christmas tree. This one had colored lights: red, green, blue, yellow. They blinked in a slow, lazy pattern. On, off. On, off. I stopped the truck. I sat there with the engine idling, staring at that tree through the bare branches of the yard. The Hensleys didn't have a generator. I knew that for a fact. I'd been out here 2 years prior when their well pump died, and they'd asked if the county had any program for backup power. They didn't. They couldn't afford one. So how was their tree lit? I thought about getting out. Thought about walking up to the house and knocking. But it was getting dark fast, and I still had work to do. I told myself I'd ask about it on the way back down. I put the truck in gear and kept going. By the time I reached the top of the ridge, the sky was black. The address I'd been given belonged to a woman named Lorraine Shepherd. Her house sat at the very end of the logging road, tucked into a clearing surrounded by white pines. The driveway was snowed over, but I could see tire tracks leading in. Someone had been there recently. I parked and grabbed my gear: flashlight, voltage tester, tool belt. The air was still and cold, the kind of cold that makes your breath hang in front of your face like fog. I could hear the wind moving through the tops of the pines, but down where I stood, everything was silent. The house was small, single-story, with a covered porch that sagged on one side. No lights. No smoke from the chimney. I knocked on the front door and waited. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Miss Shepherd? Appalachian Electric. I'm here about your power. Nothing. I tried the door. It was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, calling out as I stepped inside. Ma'am? It's the electric company. Your door was open. The smell hit me first, pine sap and something faintly sweet, like candle wax. The house was freezing inside, colder than it should have been. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing on a narrow hallway that led to the back of the house. And then I saw it. In the front room, just to my left, a Christmas tree stood in the corner. It was a real tree, a white pine, still in its stand. And it was lit. White lights, same as the caudals. They glowed softly, illuminating the bare wooden floor beneath it. I stepped closer, my boots creaking on the floorboards. There was no extension cord. No plug running to the wall. The lights were on, but there was nowhere for them to draw power from. I crouched down and checked the base of the tree. The stand was dry. No water. The needles were brown and brittle, curling inward like they'd been dead for weeks. Behind me, I heard a sound. A soft click, like a switch being flipped. I turned, my flashlight swinging across the room. The hallway was empty. But now, from somewhere deeper in the house, I could hear something else. Music. It was faint, barely audible, but I recognized it. Silent Night. The melody was slow and warped, like it was playing on an old cassette tape that had been stretched too many times. Miss Shepherd? I moved toward the hallway, my hand resting on the flashlight like it was a weapon. The music was coming from the back of the house, from what I assumed was a bedroom. The door was halfway open. I pushed it the rest of the way. The room was empty. No bed. No furniture. Just a wooden chair sitting in the center of the floor, facing the window. On the chair was a small plastic radio, the kind you'd take to the beach. It was playing Silent Night, the sound crackling and distorted. The radio wasn't plugged in. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding now. I wasn't scared, not yet, but something about the house felt wrong. It felt occupied, even though I was the only one there. I went back to the front room and checked the breaker panel on the wall near the door. Everything was tripped. The main breaker was off. There was no power coming into the house. But the tree was still lit. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. The lights didn't flicker. They didn't dim. They just burned, steady and soft, like they'd been on for hours. I left. I walked back to the truck, started the engine, and drove down the ridge without stopping. I didn't fix the power. I didn't knock on any more doors. I called the dispatcher and told her the lines were fine, that the outage must have been on the customer's end. She didn't ask questions. I never went back to Kettle Ridge. But 2 weeks later, I saw a notice in the local paper. Lorraine Shepherd had been found dead in her home on Christmas morning. The coroner said she'd been dead for at least a week before anyone checked on her. Hypothermia, most likely. The heat had been out. They didn't mention the tree. I think about that sometimes. I think about the lights in the windows. The music in the empty room. The way the air in that house felt, not empty, but waiting. I don't work Christmas Eve anymore. I tell my supervisor I've got family obligations. He doesn't push. But every year, around mid-December, I drive past the turnoff for Kettle Ridge. I don't go up. I just slow down and look. Last year, on the night of the 23rd, I saw something. Lights. Up on the ridge, scattered through the trees. Not street lights. Not headlights. Christmas lights. Blinking slow and steady in the dark. Story 2, The Manger at Piney Run Church. I'm a property appraiser for Highland County. My job is to assess land values, check for code violations, and document structures for tax purposes. It's dry work, but it's steady, and it keeps me driving through parts of the mountains most people forget exist. In December of 2017, I was assigned a batch of properties near Piney Run, a stretch of backwoods about 40 miles south of the county seat. Most of the parcels were abandoned, old home sites, burned foundations, the occasional church that hadn't seen a congregation in decades. One of those churches was on my list. It was called Piney Run Baptist, and according to the county records, it had been derelict since the early 1980s. The land was still owned by a family trust, but no one had paid taxes on it in years. My job was to photograph the structure, note its condition, and recommend whether it should be condemned. I found the church on a gray morning 2 days before Christmas. The road leading to it was barely a road, more like a pair of tire ruts cutting through a stand of leafless oaks. The ground was frozen, and my car bounced hard over the uneven terrain. I almost turned back twice. The church sat in a clearing at the end of the path, small and white and leaning slightly to one side. The roof was missing shingles, and the front steps had rotted through in places. The windows were intact, though, which surprised me. Most abandoned buildings in the area got their windows broken within a year. I parked and stepped out, pulling my jacket tighter against the cold. The air smelled like wet wood and rust. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear water running, probably Piney Run itself, a narrow creek that cut through the holler. I took a few exterior photos, noting the sagging roofline and the kudzu creeping up the north wall. Then I tried the front door. It opened. The inside was dim and smelled like mildew. The pews were still there, arranged in neat rows, though most of them were warped and splitting. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I stepped inside. At the far end of the room, a simple wooden pulpit stood on a raised platform. And in front of the pulpit, someone had set up a nativity scene. It was elaborate. Life-sized, or close to it. The figures were carved from wood and painted in faded colors, Mary in blue, Joseph in brown, the infant Jesus in a rough-hewn manger. 3 wise men stood off to one side, and a handful of shepherds knelt nearby. There were animals too, sheep, a donkey, a cow. The whole thing looked old. Not antique old, but decades old. The paint was chipped and peeling, and the wood had darkened with age. But the figures were upright, arranged carefully, as though someone had been tending to them recently. I walked closer, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The baby Jesus was missing. The manger was there, filled with straw, but the figure that should have been lying in it was gone. I crouched down and checked the floor around the scene, thinking maybe it had fallen. Nothing. I stood up and took a few pictures. Then I noticed something else. There were candles. 6 of them, arranged in a half-circle around the nativity. They were white, partially burned, the wax pooled and hardened at their bases. Someone had lit them recently, within the last few days, maybe. I felt a prickle of unease. This place was supposed to be abandoned. But someone had been here. Someone had set up this scene, lit these candles, and taken the baby. I decided to finish the job and leave. I moved through the rest of the church quickly, photographing the interior damage, water stains on the ceiling, a section of collapsed plaster near the back wall. The whole time, I kept glancing at the nativity. It sat there in the dim light, silent and waiting. When I was done, I headed for the door. That's when I heard it. A baby crying. It was faint, muffled, like it was coming from somewhere below me. I froze, my hand on the door frame. The crying continued. Soft, rhythmic, the sound rising and falling in a way that felt almost mechanical. I turned back toward the nativity. The manger was no longer empty. The baby Jesus was lying in the straw, exactly where it should have been. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. I had checked that manger 2 minutes ago. It had been empty. The crying stopped. I walked back toward the nativity slowly, my boots loud on the old floorboards. The figure in the manger was wooden, just like the others. It wasn't moving. It wasn't breathing. But I could have sworn, for just a second, that I'd seen its chest rise and fall. I reached out and touched it. The wood was warm. I jerked my hand back and stumbled away, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't run, I've never been the type to run, but I moved fast, out the door and across the clearing to my car. I got in, started the engine, and drove back down the rutted path without looking in the rearview mirror. When I got back to the office, I filed my report. I listed the church as structurally unsound and recommended demolition. I didn't mention the nativity. I didn't mention the candles or the crying or the baby that hadn't been there. 2 months later, I got a call from my supervisor. He said the Piney Run Baptist property had been cleared for demolition, but when the crew arrived, the church was gone. Not collapsed. Not burned. Gone. The foundation was still there, and so were the front steps. But the building itself had been removed. The crew chief said it looked like someone had dismantled it board by board and hauled it away. No one in the county had authorized the removal. No one had records of it. The family trust that owned the land claimed they had nothing to do with it. I drove out there to see for myself. The clearing was empty, just like they'd said. The only thing left was the foundation, a rectangle of crumbling concrete surrounded by dead grass. And in the center of it, still arranged in careful rows, were the nativity figures. All of them. Including the baby. I didn't get out of the car. I sat there for a long time, engine idling, staring at the scene. The figures were facing the road, like they were waiting for someone. I put the car in reverse and left. I don't do property appraisals in that part of the county anymore. When assignments come up for Piney Run or the hollers around it, I pass them to someone else. They never ask why. But last December, I got a call from a deputy I know. He said they'd found a man dead near the old Piney Run site. Homeless guy, probably. He'd frozen to death in the clearing. They found him lying on the foundation, curled up in the center of it. The nativity figures were gone. But next to the man's body, someone had placed a wooden carving. A baby. Wrapped in cloth, lying on a bed of straw. Story 3, the coal delivery. My father drove a coal truck for 30 years in Mingo County. He delivered to houses all through the southern hills, places so far off the main roads that GPS couldn't find them. He knew every holler, every turnoff, every family that still heated with coal when the rest of the world had moved on. He died in 2011, and I took over his route. I didn't want to, but the company needed a driver, and I needed work. So I started driving the same roads he'd driven, delivering to the same houses, seeing the same faces. Most of them remembered him. They'd say things like, "Your daddy was a good man," or, "He never missed a delivery, not once." I'd nod and thank them, and then I'd unload their coal and move on to the next stop. In December of 2012, I got an order I didn't recognize. The address was listed as Stillwell Holler, which I knew, but the name on the order was one I'd never seen before, Eunice Cobb. The request was for 2 tons of coal, delivered by Christmas Eve. I checked my father's old delivery logs, thinking maybe he'd serviced the address before. Nothing. No record of a Eunice Cobb. No record of any Cobbs at all in Stillwell Holler. I called the dispatcher to confirm. She said the order had been placed by phone 2 days earlier. The woman had paid in advance, cash, mailed to the office. Everything was legitimate. So I loaded the truck and headed out. Stillwell Holler was a narrow cleft between 2 ridges, accessible only by a gravel road that wound through dense forest. It was mid-afternoon when I made the turn, the sky already dimming. The road was rough, and I had to take it slow to keep the load from shifting. About 2 miles in, I passed the first house. It was abandoned, the windows boarded up and the yard overgrown. The second house was the same. So was the third. I kept driving. The address I'd been given was at the very end of the holler, where the road dead-ended at a gate. Beyond the gate, a driveway disappeared into the trees. I parked the truck and got out to check. The gate was padlocked, but there was a mailbox next to it. The name on the mailbox was hand-painted in faded black letters, Cobb. I honked the horn and waited. No one came. I honked again, longer this time. Still nothing. I checked the order slip. It said to deliver to the house, not to leave the coal at the gate. I didn't like the idea of walking in. Trespassing on private property was a good way to get shot in these hills, but I'd been paid, and I had a job to do. I climbed over the gate and started up the driveway. The trees closed in overhead, their branches bare and skeletal. The ground was carpeted with dead leaves, and my boots crunched loudly with each step. The air smelled like wood smoke, which gave me hope that someone was home. After about a quarter mile, the driveway opened into a clearing. The house was small and old, built from rough-cut logs that had darkened with age. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, steady line. I knocked on the door. "Ms. Cobb? I've got your coal delivery." The door opened almost immediately. The woman standing there was ancient. Her face was a map of deep wrinkles, her hair white and pulled back into a tight bun. She wore a plain black dress and a wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "You're late," she said. "I'm sorry, ma'am." The road was slow going. She looked me up and down, her eyes sharp and clear. "You're not him." "No, ma'am. My father used to drive this route. I took over after he passed." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "You'll do. Bring it around back." She closed the door before I could respond. I walked back to the truck, climbed over the gate again, and drove as close as I could get. Then I started hauling the coal. It took me 3 trips to move it all, loading it into a wheelbarrow, pushing it up the driveway, and dumping it into the wooden coal bin behind the house. The whole time, I didn't see the woman again. But I could feel her watching me from inside. When I finished, I knocked on the door to let her know I was done. No answer. I knocked again. "Ms. Cobb? Your coal's out back." "All set." The door stayed closed. I waited a few more seconds, then turned to leave. That's when I saw the other houses. They were set back in the trees, barely visible in the fading light. There were 4 of them, arranged in a loose circle around the clearing. All of them were dark. All of them looked abandoned. But from each one, a thin line of smoke rose from the chimney. I walked toward the nearest house, slowly, my breath fogging in the cold air. The windows were covered with grime, but I could see light inside, faint and flickering, like a candle. I moved to the next house. Same thing. Light in the windows. Smoke from the chimney. I checked all 4. Every one of them was lit. I went back to the woman's house and knocked again, harder this time. "Ms. Cobb, I need to ask you something." The door opened. She stood there, looking at me with that same sharp gaze. "Who lives in those houses?" I asked, pointing toward the trees. She didn't turn to look. "No one. But there's smoke. And lights." "There's always smoke," she said. "There's always lights. It's Christmas." "I don't understand." "You don't need to." She started to close the door, then paused. "Your father understood. He never asked questions." "What do you mean?" She looked at me for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "He delivered here every Christmas." Same day. Same time. For 30 years. There's no record of that. There wouldn't be. The door closed. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing. Then I turned and walked back to the truck. I didn't look at the other houses. I didn't look back at all. When I got to the office the next morning, I checked my father's logs again. This time, I went back further, 10 years, 15, 20. Nothing. But then I found something else. A small notebook tucked into the bottom of his old delivery bag. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed. Inside, in my father's handwriting, was a list of addresses. One of them was Stillwell Holler. Next to it, he'd written a single sentence: "Do not ask. Do not stay." There were dates next to the entry, one for every year, going back to 1982. The last entry was December 24, 2010. That was the day before he died. I've made the delivery every year since. Always on Christmas Eve. Always the same address. The woman never comes to the door anymore, but the order is always there. 2 tons. Paid in advance. And every year, when I drive up that driveway, the other houses are lit. I don't ask questions. I don't stay. Story 4, the choir practice. I teach music at a consolidated school in Letcher County. It's a small school, serves about 300 kids from 6 or 7 different communities scattered through the hills. Most of them are bussed in from hollers so remote they don't have cell service. Every year, we put on a Christmas program. It's a tradition that goes back decades, before the school consolidated, before they paved the main road. The kids sing carols, the parents show up with cameras, and for one night, the gym feels warm and full. In December of 2015, I started rehearsals for that year's program. We were doing the usual songs: "O Holy Night," "The First Noel," "Hark the Herald Angels Sing." The choir was small that year, only about 15 kids, but they were good. Enthusiastic. Rehearsals were held in the music room after school, 3 days a week. The room was on the second floor of the oldest part of the building, a section that used to be the original schoolhouse before the additions were built. The windows were tall and drafty, and the floorboards creaked no matter how carefully you walked. The kids didn't like practicing up there. They said it felt wrong. Too quiet. Too cold. I told them it was just an old building. The first time I heard it was on a Wednesday, about 2 weeks into rehearsals. We were running through Silent Night, and I stopped the kids halfway through to correct their timing. In the silence that followed, I heard something. Singing. It was faint, barely audible, coming from somewhere above us. A woman's voice, high and clear, singing the same song we'd just been practicing. I looked up at the ceiling. The music room was on the top floor. There was nothing above us except the attic. "Did you hear that?" I asked. The kids nodded. A few of them looked scared. "It's probably someone outside," I said. Sound carries funny in old buildings. We kept practicing, but I couldn't focus. The voice had stopped, but I kept waiting for it to start again. It didn't. Not that day. The second time was the following week. We were rehearsing "O Holy Night," and I'd asked one of the students, a girl named Emma, to sing the solo. She had a beautiful voice, strong and confident. She got through the first verse without any problems. But when she started the second verse, the other voice joined in. It was the same woman's voice I'd heard before, but this time it was louder. Clear. It was singing harmony, perfectly in tune, following Emma note for note. Emma stopped singing. The voice didn't. It continued through the rest of the verse, unaccompanied, echoing through the room like it was coming from the walls themselves. The kids sat frozen in their seats, staring at me. I stood up and walked to the door, looking out into the hallway. Empty. The voice stopped. "Maybe it's a radio," one of the boys said. I didn't think it was a radio. But I didn't know what else to tell them. We ended practice early that day. That night, I stayed late at the school to finish some grading. The building was empty, the halls dark except for the exit signs glowing at each end. I was packing up my things when I heard footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate footsteps, moving across the ceiling. I looked up. The music room was directly above my classroom. I grabbed my keys and went upstairs. The music room door was closed. I unlocked it and stepped inside, flipping on the lights. The room was empty. But the piano bench was pulled out, like someone had been sitting there. I walked over to the piano and looked at the keys. There was dust on them, undisturbed. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw it. On the chalkboard, someone had written a message in neat, careful handwriting: "We are practicing for the program." I stared at it for a long time. Then I erased it, turned off the lights, and locked the door. The next day, I moved rehearsals to the gym. The kids were relieved. I didn't tell them why I'd moved us. I just said the music room was too cold. We practiced in the gym for the next week without any problems. The program was scheduled for the night of December 22nd, a Friday. By then, the kids had the songs memorized, and I felt confident it would go well. On the day of the program, I arrived early to set up. The gym was decorated with paper snowflakes and strings of lights. Rows of chairs were arranged in front of the small stage where the choir would perform. Everything was ready. The parents started arriving around 6:30. By 7, the gym was packed, standing room only. The kids lined up backstage, nervous and excited. I gave them a pep talk, reminded them to smile and project, and then I walked out to introduce the program. The lights dimmed. The kids filed onto the stage. I raised my hands, and they began to sing. They sounded beautiful. But halfway through the third song, I heard it again. The woman's voice. It wasn't coming from the stage. It was coming from the back of the gym, near the doors. I turned to look, but I couldn't see anyone standing there. The voice grew louder. It was singing the same song as the choir, but it was off, just slightly out of sync, like an echo that didn't quite match. A few of the parents turned to look, confused. The kids kept singing, but I could see the fear in their eyes. And then the lights went out. The gym was completely dark. The kids stopped singing. Someone in the audience gasped. The woman's voice continued. It was louder now, filling the entire space, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The melody twisted, the words slurring together into something unrecognizable. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on the stage. The kids were gone. I swept the light across the gym. The stage was empty. The chairs where the audience had been sitting were empty. I was alone. And the voice was right behind me. I turned, and the lights came back on. The gym was full again. The parents were in their seats. The kids were on the stage, staring at me. Everything was exactly as it had been. Except no one was singing. I looked at the choir, at the faces of the kids I'd been teaching for months. They looked terrified. "Keep going," I said quietly. They did. We finished the program without any more interruptions. The parents clapped. The kids took their bows. Everyone went home. But the next morning, I got a call from Emma's mother. She said Emma had been having nightmares. She kept saying that someone else had been on the stage with them. Someone they couldn't see. She said Emma didn't want to sing anymore. 3 other parents called with similar stories. I don't teach choir anymore. I still work at the school, but I've handed the Christmas program off to someone else. I don't go into the music room. Last year, the new choir director asked me why rehearsals were always held in the gym. I told her the music room was too cold. She nodded and didn't ask anything else. But 2 weeks ago, I stayed late to finish some paperwork. The building was quiet, empty. And from somewhere above me, I heard it. Singing. A woman's voice. Practicing for the program. Story 5, The Shift at Blackwood Mine. I worked security at Blackwood Mine for 11 years. It's a small operation, mostly coal, tucked into the hills near the Virginia border. The mine's been there since the 1950s, and most of the guys who work it are second or third generation. Their fathers worked there. Their grandfathers worked there. It's the kind of place that doesn't change. My job was simple. I worked the night shift, midnight to 8, watching the gate and making sure nobody who wasn't supposed to be there got in. It was quiet work. Boring, mostly. The kind of job where you bring a thermos of coffee and a book and try to stay awake. December was always the slowest time. The mine scaled back operations during the holidays, and most of the crew took time off. By Christmas week, it was just me and a skeleton crew, a few maintenance guys and the shift supervisor, a man named Carl Pruitt. On December 23, 2018, I was the only one on site. The crew had finished early that day, and Carl told me he'd be back in the morning to check on some equipment. He didn't expect any problems. No deliveries scheduled. No inspections. Just me and the mine. I didn't mind. I liked the quiet. I got to the gate just before midnight and unlocked the booth. It was a small structure, barely big enough for a chair and a desk, with a space heater that rattled when it ran. I turned on the heater, poured myself some coffee, and settled in. The mine itself was about a quarter mile up the access road, hidden behind a stand of pines. I could see the entrance from the booth if I looked hard enough, a dark mouth carved into the hillside, lit by a single floodlight mounted above the opening. Around 2 in the morning, the light went out. I noticed it when I glanced up from my book. The hillside was completely dark. I waited a few seconds, thinking maybe it was just a bulb that had blown, but the light didn't come back on. I picked up the radio and called Carl. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. I wasn't worried, not yet. Carl lived 30 minutes away, and he wasn't on call. But the light was supposed to stay on. It was a safety thing, required by the state. If it was out, I needed to check it. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking up the access road. The mine entrance was quiet when I got there. The floodlight was out, like I'd thought, but the bulb looked fine. I checked the breaker box mounted on the outside wall. Everything was in the on position. I flipped the breaker off and back on. The light didn't come on. I stood there for a minute, trying to figure out what the problem was. Then I heard something. A sound, coming from inside the mine. It was rhythmic. Repetitive. Metal striking stone. Someone was working. I called out, my voice echoing into the darkness. Hello? Maintenance? The sound stopped. I waited. Nothing. I stepped closer to the entrance, shining my flashlight into the tunnel. The beam didn't reach very far. The mine went back at least a mile, branching off into a network of shafts and chambers. The air coming out of it was cool and damp, carrying the smell of coal dust and machine oil. If someone's in there, you need to come out. The mine's closed. No response. I stood there for a long time, listening. The sound didn't start again, but I had the distinct feeling that someone was standing just beyond the reach of my light, watching me. I backed away and returned to the booth. I radioed Carl again. This time, he answered. He sounded groggy, half asleep. What's going on? The light at the entrance is out. I checked the breaker. It's not working. Did you replace the bulb? No. I thought I heard someone inside. There was a long pause. What do you mean, someone inside? I heard digging. Or something like it. Carl was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Don't go in there. I'll come out in the morning and take a look." "You want me to just leave it?" "Yeah. Leave it." He hung up. I sat in the booth for the rest of the night, keeping an eye on the entrance. The light never came back on, and I didn't hear the sound again. But every time I looked up at the hillside, I felt like something was looking back. Carl showed up around 9 the next morning. I told him what had happened, and he walked up to check the light. He was gone for about 20 minutes. When he came back, he looked pale. "Did you see anyone?" I asked. He shook his head. "No. But the breaker was off. I turned it back on last night. It was off when I got there." We stared at each other. "Something else," he said. "There are footprints in the coal dust. Leading into the mine." "Whose?" "I don't know. But they're fresh." Carl called the county sheriff, and a deputy came out that afternoon. He walked into the mine with Carl, following the footprints. They came back an hour later. The deputy said the prints went about 200 yards into the main shaft and then stopped. Not at a junction or a side tunnel. They just stopped, in the middle of the passage. Like whoever left them had been pulled off the ground. No one worked the mine on Christmas Eve. Carl shut it down for the week and sent everyone home. I didn't argue. But on Christmas morning, I got a call from Carl. He was at the mine. He told me to come out. When I got there, the floodlight was on. Carl was standing at the entrance, staring into the tunnel. "What's wrong?" I asked. He pointed inside. "Look." I shined my flashlight into the mine. On the wall, about 10 feet inside the entrance, someone had written a message in coal dust. 3 words, written in neat block letters: "Merry Christmas, boys." We reported it. The sheriff's department opened an investigation. They checked the security footage, interviewed the crew, searched the mine. They didn't find anyone. But 3 days later, one of the maintenance guys found something else. In the deepest part of the mine, in a chamber that hadn't been used in years, he found a Christmas tree. It was a real tree, a white pine, decorated with old glass ornaments and strands of tarnished tinsel. Someone had planted it in the floor, securing it with rocks and coal. There were no tracks leading to it. No sign of how it had gotten there. Carl ordered the chamber sealed. I quit 2 weeks later. I don't know who, or what, was in that mine. I don't know if it's still there. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that tree. Standing alone in the dark. Decorated and waiting. For someone to come back. Story 6, The Calls from Crow Holler. I worked as a 911 dispatcher for Harlan County from 2009 to 2016. It's not an easy job, especially in rural areas where help can be an hour away and people are used to handling their own problems. Most of the calls I took were straightforward: car accidents, domestic disputes, medical emergencies. But in December of 2013, I took a call I still don't understand. It came in just after midnight on December 20th. The system showed the call was coming from a landline in Crow Holler, a remote area about 15 miles outside of town. The address was listed, but I didn't recognize the name. I answered the way I always did. 911, what's your emergency? There was silence on the other end. Not dead air, I could hear something. Breathing, maybe. Or wind. Hello? This is 911. Can you hear me? A woman's voice came through, faint and distant. He's outside. Ma'am, who's outside? He's been out there for 3 nights. Just standing. Can you describe him? He looks like my husband. I paused, typing notes into the system. Is your husband supposed to be there? No. He died. 4 years ago. I felt a chill run through me. Ma'am, I'm going to send a deputy to your location. Can you stay on the line with me? He's at the window now. Don't open the door. Stay inside. Help is on the way. The line went dead. I dispatched the nearest unit, Deputy Marcus Hale, who was patrolling about 20 minutes from Crow Holler. I gave him the address and the details of the call. He radioed back 15 minutes later. Dispatch, I'm at the location. No lights on in the house. Doesn't look like anyone's home. The call came from that address. I'm checking it out. There was a long pause. Then, dispatch, the house is empty. Doors are locked. No sign of forced entry. No vehicles in the driveway. Can you confirm the address? He read it back to me. It matched. Run a check on the property owner, I said. He came back a minute later. Property's been abandoned since 2009. Last listed owner was a woman named Grace Tolliver. Died in 2011. That doesn't make sense. Someone just called from that number. I'm telling you, there's no one here. I pulled up the call log and checked the number. It matched the landline registered to the address. According to the phone company, the line had been disconnected in 2010. Marcus, can you check the phone line? See if it's actually connected? He went silent for a moment. Yeah, I'll check. Another long pause. Then his voice came back, quieter this time. Dispatch, there's no phone line. The pole's been down for years. The wire's just gone. Someone called from that number. I don't know what to tell you. I told him to clear the scene. He did, reluctantly. I logged the call and moved on to the next one. But I couldn't stop thinking about that woman's voice. He looks like my husband. 2 nights later, I got another call from the same number. Same time. Just after midnight. 911, what's your emergency? The same woman. He's closer now. Ma'am, this is the dispatcher you spoke to before. Are you at the address in Crow Holler? He's at the door. Listen to me. Don't open it. I'm sending help. He knows I'm here. Stay inside. He's knocking. I could hear it through the phone. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Then the line went dead. I sent Marcus back out. He radioed in 20 minutes later. Same story. Empty house. No one there. No signs of life. But this time, he found something. Dispatch, there are footprints in the snow. Leading up to the front door. And back down the driveway. How many sets? Just one. Can you follow them? They go out to the road and stop. Like whoever made them just vanished. I didn't know what to say. There's something else, Marcus said. The front door. It's got scratches on it. Fresh ones. Like someone was trying to get in. I told him to take pictures and file a report. Over the next 3 nights, I got the same call. Always at midnight. Always the same woman. Always the same story. He's outside. He's closer. He's knocking. On the night of December 24th, Christmas Eve, the call came again. This time, the woman was crying. Please, she said. I let him in. Ma'am, I thought it was him. I thought he came back. Who did you let in? It's not him. It's not, the phone cut off. I sent Marcus out one more time. He was there within 30 minutes. When he radioed back, his voice was shaking. Dispatch, the front door's open. Is anyone inside? I'm going in now. He went silent for a long time. Too long. Marcus? When he came back on, he sounded different. Hollowed out. There's no one here. But, there's something on the kitchen table. What is it? A phone. One of those old rotary phones. It's plugged into the wall, but there's no jack. No line. It's just, sitting there. Does it work? I don't know. I'm not touching it. He left the house and drove back to town. He filed a report, but it didn't go anywhere. The department classified the calls as a prank, some kind of technical glitch. But I know what I heard. And I know the last thing the woman said before the line went dead for good. It's wearing his face. I quit the dispatcher job a few months later. I told myself it was for other reasons, stress, long hours, the usual. But the truth is, I couldn't take another call like that. I still live in Harlan County. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that house in Crow Holler. I think about that woman, alone in the dark, opening the door because she thought her husband had come home. I wonder if she's still there. And I wonder what's standing outside, waiting for the next person to let it in. Story 7, The Night Janitor. I was the night janitor at Grayson Elementary for 6 years. It's a small school, built in the 1970s, sitting on the edge of town where the roads turn to gravel and the houses thin out. The building's shaped like an L, with the classrooms on one side and the gym and cafeteria on the other. My shift started at 11 and ended at 6, 5 nights a week. It was good work. Quiet. I liked working alone, moving through the empty hallways with nothing but the sound of my cart and the hum of the floor buffer. Most nights, I'd finish by 4 and spend the last 2 hours in the break room, drinking coffee and reading the paper. In December of 2014, things started to feel different. It was subtle at first. Little things. A door I knew I'd locked would be open when I came back through. The thermostat would be turned up, even though I was the only one in the building. I'd hear footsteps in the hallway above me, even though I was on the top floor. I figured it was old building sounds. Pipes settling. The heating system kicking on. That kind of thing. But then I found the ornament. It was on a Tuesday night, about a week before Christmas. I was cleaning the second grade hallway when I noticed something hanging from the ceiling near one of the classroom doors. A Christmas ornament. It was small, made of red glass, hanging from a piece of string. There was no hook, no tree, no reason for it to be there. It just hung there, turning slowly, even though there was no breeze. I took it down and set it on the teacher's desk. Figured one of the kids must have put it up as a prank. The next night, it was back. Same spot. Same ornament. Hanging from the same piece of string. I checked the classroom. All the windows were locked. The door had been locked when I arrived. No one else had been in the building. I took the ornament down again and threw it in the trash. It was back the next night. This time, I didn't touch it. I just left it there and kept working. A few nights later, I was cleaning the gym when I heard music. It was faint, coming from somewhere deep in the building. I recognized the tune, Deck the Halls. It sounded like it was being played on an old music box, slow and slightly off-key. I followed the sound down the main hallway, past the classrooms, toward the library. The music was coming from inside. I unlocked the door and stepped in. The library was dark except for the glow of the emergency exit sign. The music stopped the moment I crossed the threshold. I stood there, listening. The silence felt heavy, like something was waiting. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw it. In the reading corner, where the kids sat during story time, someone had set up a Christmas tree. It was small, maybe 3 feet tall, sitting on one of the low tables. It was decorated with construction paper ornaments, the kind the kids made in art class. Stars, bells, candy canes, all cut out and colored with crayons. But the lights were on. The tree was lit with tiny white bulbs, glowing softly in the dark. I walked over to it slowly. There was no cord. No plug. The lights were just on. I reached out to touch one, and the music started again. Deck the Halls. Playing from somewhere behind me. I spun around, my heart hammering. The library was empty. I grabbed the tree, lights and all, and carried it out to the dumpster. I didn't care if it was some kind of art project or a surprise for the kids. I didn't want it in the building. When I came back inside, the music was still playing. It was coming from the hallway now. Moving. Getting fainter, like it was walking away from me. I followed it. The sound led me through the building, past the gym, past the cafeteria, all the way to the far end of the L-shaped wing where the older classrooms were. It stopped at the last door on the left, a storage room that hadn't been used in years. The door was open. I hadn't unlocked it. I didn't even have a key for it. I pushed the door wider and looked inside. The room was full of old furniture, desks, chairs, filing cabinets, all stacked and covered with dust. And in the center of the room, someone had set up a chair. A small wooden chair, the kind the kindergartners used. Sitting on the chair was a doll. It was old, handmade, with a fabric body and a painted face. It was wearing a red dress, and in its lap was a music box. The music box was open. The tune was winding down, the notes slowing, but I could still hear it. Deck the Halls. I backed out of the room and shut the door. I didn't finish my shift that night. I left the building, went home, and didn't come back until the next evening. When I arrived, the storage room door was still closed. I unlocked it and looked inside. The chair was still there. But the doll was gone. I found it 2 hours later, sitting on my cart in the main hallway. The music box was open. I called the school principal the next morning and told him I needed to talk. I explained what I'd been seeing, the ornament, the tree, the music, the doll. I expected him to think I was crazy, but he just listened quietly. When I finished, he sighed. "You're not the first person to mention this." "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "We've had 3 other janitors over the years. None of them lasted more than a few months. They all said the same things you're saying. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have taken the job if I had?" I didn't answer. He told me the school had a history. Back in the 1980s, a little girl had died in the building. It was an accident. She'd been playing in one of the storage rooms during Christmas break and gotten locked inside. By the time they found her, it was too late. "They say she loved Christmas," the principal said. "Her classroom was always the most decorated. She made ornaments for everyone." "What was her name?" "Caroline." I worked 1 more week after that. Just long enough to finish out the year. On my last night, I left the doll where I'd found it, on my cart, music box open. I didn't throw it away. I didn't move it. I just left. When I walked out of the building for the last time, I looked back at the windows. In one of the second-grade classrooms, I saw a light. A small light, hanging in the window. A red Christmas ornament. Turning slowly. Even though I'd thrown it away a week before. Story 8, The Gift Exchange. I worked at a group home in McDowell County for 5 years. It was a small facility, maybe a dozen residents, all older adults who couldn't live on their own anymore. Most of them had dementia or other cognitive issues. My job was to help with daily care, meals, medication, activities. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and the residents were kind. Every December, we held a Christmas party. We'd decorate the common room, play music, and do a gift exchange. The gifts were nothing fancy: socks, candy, puzzle books. It was more about the routine, the normalcy, than the presents themselves. In December of 2016, one of the residents, a man named Harlan Burke, asked me if we could do something different that year. Harlan was in his late 80s, quiet and polite, with a sharp memory for a man his age. He'd been a coal miner for most of his life, and he still had the rough hands and stooped posture to prove it. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. "I'd like to invite someone to the party," he said. "A family member?" I asked. "No. A friend." "That's fine, Mr. Burke. Just let me know their name, and I'll add them to the list." He smiled. "Her name's Evelyn. Evelyn Marsh. Does she live nearby?" "She used to." I didn't ask any more questions. I figured she was an old friend from town, someone he'd known years ago. I told him to let her know she was welcome. The party was scheduled for December 22nd, a Thursday evening. We spent the afternoon decorating, hanging paper snowflakes, stringing lights, setting out cookies. The residents were in good spirits, chatting and laughing as we worked. Around 5, Harlan came to me and said, "Evelyn's here." "Oh, good. Where is she?" He pointed toward the hallway. "She's waiting by the door." I looked. The hallway was empty. "I don't see anyone, Mr. Burke." He frowned. "She's right there." I walked over to the hallway and looked again. No one. "Maybe she stepped outside?" I suggested. Harlan shook his head, but he didn't argue. The party started at 6. We gathered in the common room, passed out gifts, and sang a few carols. Harlan sat in his usual spot near the window, but he didn't participate. He just stared at the empty chair next to him. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "Evelyn didn't get a gift," he said. "I'm sorry, Mr. Burke. I didn't know she was coming. I'll find something for her. It's too late now." He looked genuinely upset, so I brought him a small gift from the extras we kept in the supply closet, a box of chocolates. I set it on the chair next to him. "You can give this to her," I said. He picked up the box and held it in his lap, smiling for the first time that evening. "Thank you." The rest of the party went smoothly. The residents ate cookies, exchanged gifts, and listened to Christmas music. By 8, most of them had gone to bed. I was cleaning up the common room when I noticed the chair next to Harlan's. The box of chocolates was open. I walked over and looked inside. Half the chocolates were gone. I checked the floor, thinking maybe they'd fallen out. Nothing. "Mr. Burke," I called. "Did you eat some of the chocolates?" He was in the hallway, heading to his room. He turned and looked at me. "No. Evelyn did." "When?" "During the party. She sat right there." He pointed at the chair. I didn't know what to say. The next morning, I asked the other staff if anyone had seen a visitor at the party. No one had. I checked the sign-in sheet at the front desk. No one named Evelyn Marsh had signed in. I asked Harlan about her again. He told me they'd met in 1952, when they were both young. She'd lived in the holler where he grew up, and they'd been sweethearts for a while. But she died young, drowned in a creek during a spring flood. "I still see her sometimes," he said. "Especially around Christmas. That was her favorite time of year." I didn't know what to say to that. A few nights later, I was working the overnight shift. Most of the residents were asleep, and I was sitting in the office, catching up on paperwork. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I got up and looked. Harlan was standing at the end of the hall, near the common room. He was dressed in his pajamas, staring at something I couldn't see. "Mr. Burke? It's late. You should be in bed." He didn't respond. I walked toward him, and that's when I saw it. In the common room, someone had turned on the Christmas tree lights. They glowed softly in the dark, casting long shadows across the floor. "Did you turn those on?" I asked. Harlan shook his head. Evelyn did. Mr. Burke, she's right there. He pointed at the chair by the tree. I looked. The chair was empty. But as I stood there, I felt something. A coldness in the air that hadn't been there before. And for just a moment, I thought I saw something, a shape, sitting in the chair, watching us. I blinked, and it was gone. I led Harlan back to his room and made sure he was settled. Then I went back to the common room and turned off the tree lights. The next morning, I found something on the chair. A single chocolate, still in its wrapper, sitting on the seat. I hadn't left it there. Harlan passed away 2 weeks later, on January 5th. It was peaceful, the nurse said. He'd gone to sleep and didn't wake up. When we cleaned out his room, we found a small box under his bed. Inside was a photograph, a young woman, smiling, standing in front of a wooden house. On the back, in faded handwriting, it said, Evelyn. Christmas 1951. I kept the photograph. I don't know why. Maybe because I felt like someone should remember her. We still hold the Christmas party every year. Same decorations. Same routine. But now, I always set out an extra chair. Just in case. Story 9, The Visitors. I live alone in a cabin at the end of Glade Creek Road. It's not much, 2 rooms, wood stove, no running water, but it's mine, and it's quiet. I bought the place in 2008 after I retired from the railroad. I wanted somewhere I could disappear for a while, and the mountains seemed like a good place to do that. The cabin's been there since the 1940s, built by a man named Pruitt who logged the area. When I bought it, the real estate agent told me it came with some history. The Pruitts had been a big family in the holler, but they'd all died or moved away by the 1970s. The cabin had sat empty for years before I found it. I didn't care about the history. I just wanted the land. For the first few years, everything was fine. I kept to myself, didn't bother anyone, and no one bothered me. I'd see the occasional hunter passing through or a hiker who'd gotten lost, but most of the time I was alone. In December of 2019, that changed. I woke up on the morning of December 18th to find footprints in the snow outside my cabin. At first, I thought they were mine, maybe I'd gone out to the woodpile the night before and forgotten. But when I looked closer, I saw that the prints didn't match my boots. They were smaller. Narrower. And there were 2 sets. The footprints came up the driveway, circled the cabin, and then disappeared back into the woods. I checked the doors and windows. Everything was locked. Nothing had been disturbed. I figured it was kids, maybe. Teenagers from town, messing around. But the next morning, the footprints were back. Same pattern. Up the driveway, around the cabin, back into the woods. This time, I followed them. The trail led into the forest, winding through the trees for about a quarter mile before stopping at a clearing. The snow in the clearing was undisturbed except for a single spot in the center where it looked like someone had been standing. There were no tracks leading away. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Then I went back to the cabin and locked the doors. That night, I heard them. I was lying in bed, almost asleep, when I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate footsteps, moving from one end to the other. I got up and looked out the window. The porch was empty. But the footsteps continued. Back and forth. Back and forth. I grabbed my shotgun and opened the door. The porch was empty. The footsteps stopped. I stood there in the cold, staring out at the dark woods, my breath fogging in the air. And then I saw them. 2 figures, standing at the edge of the trees. They were barely visible, just dark shapes against the snow. They didn't move. They didn't make a sound. They just stood there. Watching. I raised the shotgun and called out. This is private property. You need to leave. The figures didn't respond. I fired a shot into the air. The sound echoed through the holler, loud and sharp. The figures didn't flinch. They didn't run. They just turned and walked back into the woods. I went inside and locked the door. The next morning, the footprints were back. But this time, they didn't stop at the edge of the porch. They came up to the door. And there, on the doorstep, someone had left a gift. It was wrapped in old newspaper, tied with twine. I picked it up carefully, half expecting it to be a prank. Inside was a photograph. It was old, black and white, faded with age. It showed a family standing in front of my cabin. A man, a woman, and 2 children. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, 1940s, maybe. They were smiling. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "The Pruitts. Christmas 1947. I stared at the photo for a long time. That night, they knocked. I was sitting by the stove, trying to read, when I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. I didn't answer. The knocking continued. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more knocks. I stood up and walked to the door, my hand on the shotgun. "Who's there?" No answer. The knocking stopped. I waited. And then I heard it. Singing. Faint, distant, coming from somewhere outside. A child's voice, singing a Christmas carol. Silent night, holy night. I opened the door. The porch was empty. The singing stopped. But on the doorstep, there was another gift. I didn't pick it up. I just closed the door and went back inside. The gifts kept coming. Every night, another one. Wrapped in newspaper. Tied with twine. I stopped opening them. I stopped looking. But I could feel them watching. On Christmas Eve, I woke up to find the cabin door open. I know I'd locked it. I check it 3 times every night. But it was open. And sitting on the floor, just inside the doorway, was a small Christmas tree. It was real, freshly cut, still smelling of pine. Someone had decorated it with old glass ornaments and strands of tarnished tinsel. At the base of the tree was a note, written in careful handwriting, "Thank you for keeping the cabin warm." I left the next morning. I drove into town, checked into a motel, and didn't come back until after New Year's. When I returned, the cabin was exactly as I'd left it. Except for the tree. It was still there, standing in the corner. The ornaments were still on it. The tinsel was still draped across the branches. But the needles were brown and brittle, like it had been dead for weeks. I dragged the tree outside and burned it. I still live in the cabin. I haven't left. I don't plan to. But every December, I hear them. Footsteps on the porch. Singing in the woods. Knocking at the door. And every year, on Christmas Eve, I find a gift on my doorstep. I don't open them anymore. I just leave them there. Because I know, sooner or later, they'll want something in return. And I don't think I'll like what they're asking for. END